A man named Dean drives his family to New Jersey to check out a new house they're planning to buy. As they arrive in the neighborhood, they look quite happy and excited to see how calm the area looks. When they finally arrive at the open house, Dean's children, Ellie and Carter, quickly run down to admire the place. While at it, Carter sees a strange man named John looking at him through the window. This seems quite creepy. But when he tells Dean and his mom, Nora, about the man, they mention that John is likely one of the other people interested in buying the house. Shortly after, the family enters the house to start checking around. Suddenly, Dean hears a man named Jasper standing near a dumbwaiter, while his sister Pearl tries to drag him away. Dean finds this odd, and as he wonders what they're doing, Pearl apologizes for the disturbance and mentions that the dumbwaiter is a national treasure.
It's a national treasure.
She adds that she's the president of the local preservation society, which is an organization that works toward retaining the key parts of the community. Before Dean can say anything, Pearl eventually leaves with Jasper. Elsewhere, Nora walks around the house and realizes that the realtor in charge of selling the house, Karen, is an old friend from college. The two ladies look happy to see each other, and Karen also commends Nora for being such a great artist whose work was recently featured in a museum. Nora thanks Karen for the kind words, and they continue talking about the house. While moving around, a man named Roger stops and asks Karen about the builders of the house. Karen finds this weird, but as Roger learns that she doesn't understand his question, he eventually leaves. As the two ladies then walk outside, Nora sees Pearl staring at the house strangely before the woman eventually walks away. Meanwhile, Dean meets Ellie to ask what she thinks of the house. The girl doesn't look as excited as her dad, but she says she likes the house. However, she adds that the only thing she's worried about is her friends in New York, which is where they used to live. Shortly after, Dean heads outside and sees two neighbors, Mitch and Maureen, sitting outside their house. Dean waves at them in a friendly way, but the couple just continue staring at him. He eventually ignores them and walks away to meet Nora, who introduces him to Karen. As she then asks what he thinks of the house, Dean says he likes it and that he'd be making an offer. Nora is shocked to hear this, but since she also likes the house, she sounds happy about Dean's decision. The next day, Dean goes to see his bank manager, Steve, to ask for a loan so he can pay for the house. Steve advises Dean not to take a loan because he's still fresh from bankruptcy. However, Dean says a long time has passed already and that he just wants to make his family happy. He then convinces Steve to help him find any possible options to afford the house. After a while, Steve tells Dean that he'd have to put all the family's investments on the line, and he immediately agrees. 6 weeks later, Dean and his family have already started living in their new home. As he returns from work, someone appears to be watching him, but he's unaware. When he enters the house, Carter shows Dean his new pet. Even though he seems happy that his son feels more comfortable in the house, Dean tells Carter not to let the ferret move around unsupervised. Almost immediately, Ellie asks Dean when her piano will arrive, and he informs her that the moving company is already bringing it in. Elsewhere, Maureen and Mitch see the piano being taken into the house. They seem pissed by this and agree that the new family will be a problem for them. Shortly after, Dean meets Nora while she's still decorating the room. She then tells him that she's so happy they decided to move to the new house. Minutes later, Ellie hears music playing from the attic. So she calls her parents to check it. However, before they get there, the music stops. Dean then seems more concerned about his daughter putting on lipstick. After he complains about it, Ellie says she'll wash it off. The next morning, Dean wakes up and heads to the kitchen to make coffee. While he's at it, he suddenly gets startled by Jasper, who has entered the house to bring him the newspaper that was dropped in front of the door. Dean looks really scared by this, but Jasper just continues to stare at him until he eventually walks out. Shortly after, Dean informs Nora of what happened, but she insists that she locked the front door before going to bed. However, Dean says he's not sure she did, because Jasper still managed to enter the house. While they talk about it, Ellie sees a letter addressed to the house and opens it. She then reads it out loud, and as the message of the letter starts to get really dark and threatening, Dean collects it from her. It turns out that the letter is from someone named the the Watcher, who claims to be related to the original owners of the house. The person also mentions that he'll now be watching Dean's family to find out more information about them. Dean and Nora immediately report this to the police chief, Chamberlain, but he says it's likely nothing. He adds that the letter could have been written by Jasper, who he calls a harmless person. Dean and Nora still believe it's not normal to receive such a letter, so Chamberlain says he'll assign a patrol car to their house. A few hours later, Nora joins the town's country club and plays tennis with Karen.
Oh, shit.
After their game, they eventually head into the club's cafeteria to have lunch. While they're eating, Karen mentions that Nora and Dean must be really rich to have been able to afford the house. However, Nora says it's not as it seems because a few years ago, they were actually bankrupt due to some bad investments Dean made. She eventually stops talking about it, and after they leave the cafeteria, Nora tells Karen about the letter from the Watcher. Since she believes it could likely be a prank from the other bidders on the house who want to scare them, Nora asks Karen if she knows any of them. Karen initially says she can't give up confidential information, but when Nora insists, she says she'll see what she can do about it. Elsewhere, Dean sees Mitch and Maureen picking out flowers from inside his property. He immediately confronts them about it, but they don't seem to like this. Maureen then mentions that the flowers actually migrated from her compound to Dean's house, but Dean doesn't seem to care. As he complains about it again, Maureen tells him that since he's not a nice person, they'll be watching in more ways than he can think. Dean looks shocked to hear this, but he says nothing and watches the couple leave. Later that day, Dean sounds quite angry at the dining table and complains about Carter playing with his ferret while they're eating. He also scolds Ellie for dressing indecently, and after she walks away, Nora tells him that he needs to stop being harsh to the kids, especially their daughter. Shortly after, Carter decides to play with the dumbwaiter. As he opens it though, he looks incredibly terrified to see Jasper inside it. After hearing his son's screams, Dean immediately drags Jasper outside and pushes him to the ground.
Get out! And you stay out!
Pearl sees this and helps her brother while saying sorry to Dean on behalf of Jasper. However, she adds that Jasper has become too fond of the dumbwaiter because the previous owners of the house always let him use it whenever he wants. Dean sounds angry and tells Pearl to keep her mentally ill brother away from his house. He also says that during the renovations, he'll get the dumbwaiter removed. Pearl tells him not to do something like that because it's against what the Preservation Society wants.
You wouldn't dare.
But he says he doesn't care. As he also insults her, she tells him to watch his back because she has now got her eyes on him. Dean finds this threatening, but before he says anything, Nora drags him inside. The next day, the couple then hire a young security expert named Dakota to help them fix an alarm system around the house. After agreeing to the terms of his contract, Dakota mentions that he'll be back the next day to start the installation process. That night, though, while the family is sleeping, someone breaks into the house and kills Carter's ferret after the pet sneaks out of his cage. The next morning, when Carter sees this, he looks scared and screams to alert his parents. A few hours later, Chamberlain arrives at the house after being informed of what happened. Again, he says it's nothing to worry about because the ferret likely ran into a wall and killed himself. Dean sounds shocked to hear this, and he says it would be better to get Jasper arrested. However, Chamberlain tells him not to jump to conclusions because it could have been anyone. He adds that after Dakota finishes setting up the alarms and cameras, they'll feel safer. After he leaves,
Thanks for the coffee. I'll show myself out.
Dean feels disgusted, and as he sees Ellie using lipstick again, he complains about it. Ellie doesn't seem to get this, and she sounds angry as she says she can do whatever she wants in her room. As she then walks away, she walks past Dakota, and they seem to find each other attractive. The next day, Nora calls Karen to ask if she has gotten any information about the other bidders, but her number goes straight to voicemail. Later that night, though, Karen drives past the house and looks at it strangely. In the morning, while Dean checks the mailbox, he finds another letter from the Watcher, who mentions that he now knows the names of the young bloods in the house. He also says that he'll continue watching them so he can devise a plan on what to do with them. The Watcher adds that Dean and his wife's greed brought them to the house just like the past 3 owners, who eventually sold it. He then says that he won't stop watching them. Dean immediately runs around the house to check the windows the Watcher has likely been watching them from. As he then runs out of the house looking scared, Nora arrives home and sees him with the Watcher's new letter. Shortly after, the couple meet Chamberlain again regarding the new letter. Even though he initially says there's nothing more he can do aside from allowing one of his officers to patrol the area, Chamberlain mentions that he'll get the letters analyzed for DNA samples. Since the Watcher seems to be so interested in the house, he then advises them to list it for sale to see who makes an offer first. Dean and Nora don't like this idea.
What? I'm not selling the house, detective.
So Chamberlain says that if they want more help, they'll have to hire a private detective. Since they sound interested in this, Chamberlain suggests a lady named Theodora. The next day, Dean meets Theodora and tells her about the case. She then says she'll help him find the Watcher. She also narrates the story of how she made the decision to become a private eye. Dean doesn't seem too interested in this, and as she tells him her rate, he stands up and says he'll get back to her.
Listen, thank you so much.
As he's leaving, though, Theodora stops him and says she'll do it for half her usual rate. Dean is shocked to hear this, but she says she's only doing it because she has liver cancer and has to take care of her daughter. When Dean arrives home that day, he tells Nora about Theodora, and they decide to hire her. However, Nora says she'd prefer to stay in a motel for the safety of the family. Dean doesn't think this is necessary.
Are you going to be okay with that?
But Nora insists on leaving because she also doesn't want their asthmatic son to be in the house while the renovation is going on. Dean finally agrees to this, but he says he'll have to stay back so he can let the construction workers into the house. A while later, he then checks his family into a nearby motel before returning home. As he arrives, someone appears to be watching him from behind the garden, but he's unaware. After entering the house and turning off all the lights, Dean heads to his room to sleep. Almost immediately, someone rings the doorbell, so Dean goes outside to see who it is. There still appears to be someone watching him, but he can't see the person. Just as he enters the house again, he hears a song playing from the attic. When he gets there, he sees that it's coming from an intercom, and this leaves him shocked because he didn't turn it on. As he still looks confused, someone walks past the door. And even though Dean notices it, he doesn't see anyone when he turns. Shortly after, Nora gets a call from the hotel room, but the caller just breathes heavily and says nothing. This scares her, so she immediately calls Dean to come over. When he arrives, the couple immediately ask the motel's receptionist for more information on the person who called Nora's room. The woman then says she couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, so Nora suggests calling back. When the woman does this, no one answers the phone, but a phone is then seen ringing inside their house. The next day, Nora meets Karen at the country club, and they talk about the new letter. Seeing as Nora feels disturbed by this, Karen tells her to think about selling the house. She adds that it would be a good way to forget about the Watcher, even though Nora and Dean will have to sell for a lower price. Nora doesn't seem comfortable with making a loss from the sale, but Karen tells her to think about it. Elsewhere, Theodora tells Dean that she has made some findings regarding the case, but he says he's no longer interested because he wants to support his wife in selling the house.
My wife wants to sell the house.
Despite this, Theodora convinces Dean to change his mind because not knowing who the Watcher is will haunt him for forever. Following this, she gives him the contact of a man named Andrew who once used to live in his current house. Later that day, Dakota hears Dean and Nora talking about how they're scared of someone breaking into the motel room. He then suggests helping them watch the rooms from his van every night. Since this is a good idea, Nora and Dean immediately hire him.
Okay, yeah, that would be so helpful.
The following day, Dean calls Andrew to meet him at a restaurant, and the man agrees. When they meet, Andrew looks quite scared as he talks about how his family also got letters from the Watcher after moving to the house. He adds that Mitch and Maureen were quite friendly at first, until he eventually learned that they weren't as good as he thought. One night, before putting his son to bed, the boy tells Andrew about how he bumped into Mitch and Maureen, standing over a dead baby in one of their cult meetings. A while later,
he was over at Mitch and Mo's.
Andrew's wife also tells him about a day she saw Maureen drinking their son's blood when he got injured. Following this, Andrew reports to the police, but they tell him that he's being delusional. Despite his efforts to prove that Mitch and Maureen are evil, Andrew is eventually forced to leave the house and return to the city after losing his job. However, things didn't get better for the family, and his wife killed herself. After telling his story, Andrew advises Dean to leave the house while he still can. He also says he knows that Mitch and Maureen are the ones sending the letters to Dean. The following day, construction workers arrive at Dean's house to begin the renovation of the kitchen and basement. Just as they start working, Maureen comes over to complain about the noise, but Dean says he doesn't care what she thinks. She sounds angry and mentions that she'll be watching him.
I'm watching you!
Since this sounds exactly like what the Watcher kept saying in his letters, Dean accuses Maureen of sending them. Instead of denying it, Maureen only jokes about how she'll sit outside to watch his house very well, so Dean tells her to be careful because she might get cancer. Unfortunately, it turns out that Maureen actually has cancer, and this hurts her. The next day, Dean arrives at work and learns that a colleague named Randy has been made partner at his company ahead of him. This gets him pissed, so he complains to his boss, who says that Dean has not been his usual self for a while. He adds that if Dean can do better, he might eventually make partner one day. Dean looks devastated by this, especially because he was hoping to become a partner at the company, so he'd be able to earn enough money to pay off the loan he took to buy the house. However, he decides not to tell Nora because she'd be really disappointed. While they're talking on the phone, she senses that something is wrong, but he tells her that he's fine. Later that night, while he's sleeping, he hears gunshots and immediately wakes up. After checking around and seeing nothing, Dean believes he was only having a nightmare, so he heads back to bed. In the morning, Nora and the kids arrive at the house to spend the day with Dean. After a while, Dean tells Nora that he thought he heard gunshots while he was sleeping. Ellie hears this and sounds scared, but Dean quickly brushes off the subject. He then tells Nora that he had an argument with Maureen the previous day. He also adds that he just learned something that points at Maureen and Mitch as the ones sending them the Watcher letters. As they keep talking, they hear a police siren outside the house, so they go outside to check what's happening. When they get there, they see a dead body being wheeled out of Maureen's house. As they look shocked, Maureen's son, Christopher, shows up and accuses Dean of threatening his parents. He adds that Mitch killed Maureen and then killed himself after they both felt threatened by what Dean said the other day. Dean looks confused and says he didn't threaten anyone, but Christopher mentions that his mom really had cancer and didn't have long to live. Dean still looks terrified by this, and as he returns into the house, Nora asks what he really told Maureen.
What did you say to her?
Dean denies saying anything hurtful, and he also mentions that he can't believe Nora thinks he really threatened them. After his family leaves for the motel, Dean goes to bed, knowing that the Watcher letters could now stop because his main suspects are dead. While he's sleeping, though, the alarm system starts ringing. So he quickly checks around the house again. Unfortunately, he doesn't find anyone, so he turns off the alarm and returns to his room. There, he then sees Jasper standing on the road and staring at him while smiling. This looks creepy to Dean, but as he keeps watching, Jasper eventually walks away. The next day, Dean invites Theodora to look at his board of suspects. As Dean then talks about how he believes everything Andrew said, Theodora informs him that she's not sure Maureen and Mitch had anything to do with it. She adds that Andrew has a history of mental illness, and he could be lying about everything that happened. She then tells Dean that they should be looking at Jasper instead. Dean asks why she thinks so, and she mentions that many years ago, Jasper was a lively person until he suddenly stopped talking and was diagnosed with a mental disorder. Since he has always lived near Dean's house, Theodora suggests that he likely saw something that made him decide never to talk again. Elsewhere, Karen notices that Nora isn't looking too happy, so she asks what's wrong.
I can't say. I'm really sorry.
Nora mentions that she's just bothered about everything that has been happening because Dean is no longer his old self. Karen then says he might be having an affair and that Nora needs to start making decisions for herself. She adds that the first thing Nora should do is to sell the house before many people start hearing about the strange letters. Nora doesn't like this suggestion, but Karen says she already has an alternative place she can show to her friend. Nora decides to follow her, but when they get there, she says she's not interested in changing houses.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Karen sounds angry and continues to tell her to sell the house, saying she's only offering Nora a way out. Nora finds this odd, but she says she'll ask Dean about it first. Meanwhile, Dean walks around the house and sees that Ellie's door is locked. He then knocks and asks if she's hiding something, but she sounds angry and accuses him of always thinking of her badly. Before Dean can apologize, she quickly locks the door, but it turns out that she's actually hiding Dakota inside her room. A while later, Dean sees John picking something out of the fridge. Dean doesn't recognize him, so he asks who the strange man is and why he's opening the fridge. John then says that Nora actually told him to take whatever he wants in the fridge. He adds that he's the building inspector, so Dean feels safer knowing who he is. After talking about how everything is fine with the renovation, John suddenly starts saying weird things about how certain historical events always unleash a crisis every 80 years.
It's the fourth turning.
Dean doesn't understand what he's saying, but the man still mentions that there's a crisis coming. Shortly after, he then tells Dean that he saw Ellie and Dakota a while ago and that it seems they're dating. He adds that he once had a similar problem with his daughter, but he eventually fixed it. Dean gets uncomfortable talking about this with John, so the man says he's leaving. On his way out,
You won't see me again.
Dean asks what he meant by fixing what happened with his daughter, and John says she just never wore anything indecent after he handled the situation. As he's leaving, he then tells Dean to bring his family to a nearby Lutheran church because it might help them. Following this, Dean returns into the house and asks one of the construction workers about the building inspector. Surprisingly, the leader of the construction workers says he doesn't know anyone named John, and this leaves Dean confused.
What are you talking? Who was I just talking to?
Shortly after, while Nora and the kids are returning to the motel, Dean stops Ellie and asks if she's dating Dakota. Ellie blatantly denies this and sounds angry at her dad for insinuating that she's doing something bad. The next day, while Dean is at work, Theodora calls him to meet her at a nearby restaurant to see what she just found. Dean immediately leaves work, and when he gets to the restaurant, Theodora mentions that what she just found is actually a well-kept secret in the town. She then mentions that after going to ask Chamberlain if he had any files regarding old owners of the house, he looked at her strangely before showing her a box with a broken seal. After looking through the box, Theodora discovers that a man named John Graff once lived in the house with his family. Things appeared to be going well for him until he lost his job and started stealing from his mother's money while pretending to still go to work every day. Unfortunately, this brought him to the Watcher's notice, and in the first letter he received, the Watcher mentioned that he knew what John was hiding. This scares him, but he still doesn't stop stealing from his mother. In the letters that follow, John increasingly gets worried as the Watcher calls him a greedy person and tells him to give the house what it wants, which is blood. John doesn't want to do this, but after the letters continue to be threatening, he sits at home one day and cuts himself out of all his family photos, which he eventually burns. Shortly after, he then kills his entire family, including his daughter Pat, who he got angry with for having an affair with her teacher. Days later, John leaves town, and while Jasper tries to find John's son, who he liked a lot, he realizes that the entire family is dead. This scares him, and he immediately calls the police, who found out that John drained the blood of his family members. The cops also found empty glass jars in the basement after someone had drained the blood John stored inside them. Theodora then mentions that no one knows what John looks like because there are no pictures of him anywhere. She adds that, surprisingly, Pat's teacher also turned up dead just days before John's family were found dead. Dean is terrified to hear this, and he asks why no one told him about the story before he bought the house. Theodora then repeats that it was kept a secret to protect the town's image. After Theodora shows him the old letters John received, as well as pictures of the man's dead family, Dean remembers that the strange building inspector also bears the same name. He then asks Theodora if there's a record of the church John's family went to. As she says that it's the Lutheran church in town, Dean looks shocked and tells Theodora that John came into his house. Elsewhere, Nora drives the kids back home now that the renovation is nearly complete.
Wait, so it's like done?
She also mentions that since the cameras have all been installed, they'll now be safer. Shortly after, Dean goes to Pearl's house to find Jasper. Luckily, he's the one who opens the door, but before he closes it, Dean asks if he knows John Graff. Jasper seems startled by this question, but before Dean can get anything from him, Pearl comes over and tells her brother not to answer him because he's a bad neighbor. Following this, Dean heads home to meet his family. That night, after the family settles in, someone stands outside the house and watches them again. The next morning, after Dean takes the kids to school, Nora checks the mailbox and finds another letter from the Watcher. This time, the Watcher sounds angry and says that even though they put cameras around the house, they'll never be safe from him. Later that day, Dean and Nora visit Karen's company to accuse her boss, Darren, of hiding important information about the house. Darren says he didn't know anything about it, so Dean asks if he at least knows the last owners of the house. Darren says he only dealt with a business manager who was contracted by a company who were the previous owners. Seeing as he's not helping, Dean threatens to sue Darren, but he doesn't seem moved. He also says he'll be ready for them in court because he knows he didn't break any laws. As Dean and Nora then leave, Karen continues to ask her friend if she and her husband will now be listing the house. However, Nora says they're not thinking about that yet, and this makes Karen look pissed. The next day, Dean arrives at work and receives a package containing a phone book. As he checks it, he sees Pat's name and picture, and this helps him confirm that she's a real person. Dean abandons his meetings for the day and leaves work early so he can head home to continue looking for anything he can find on John. That night, while he's working on the case, Nora tries to see what he's doing, but he doesn't share too much with her. However, he says it's quite suspicious that Chamberlain just gave up files about a cover-up that involved the police department. The next morning, Dean sees Ellie and Dakota talking outside the house, so he goes to confront them. Ellie doesn't like this, but Dean immediately tells her to leave so she can prepare for school.
Shouldn't you be getting ready for school?
After Dakota then mentions that he only came to fix one of the cameras that got broken, Dean tells him to leave immediately he's done. Shortly after, Theodora visits the house to discuss the case with Dean and Nora. While they're at it, Nora learns that someone who could be John came into the house, and this gets her pissed. She then complains about how Dean has been so secretive. Dean immediately gets defensive and says he didn't know who John was until recently. He also adds that he thinks they should sell the house, but Nora refuses his suggestion because they would lose a lot of money and possibly go bankrupt again. Dean says he just wants to do what's best for the family, but Nora starts to doubt his true intentions. Before the argument escalates, Theodora interrupts them and mentions that she doesn't think John Graff is the same John that came to the house. She adds that it would just be odd for him to be the same person because John Graff also got letters from the Watcher while he stayed in the house. Theodora then mentions that after doing some digging that wasn't completely legal, she has discovered that they're looking in the wrong direction. As Dean and Nora ask what she means, Theodora says that her new suspect is Dakota. She adds that he might have used the letters to make them feel unsafe, just so he could work for them. Dean and Nora don't know what to think, but Theodora shows them that, after getting someone to intercept Dakota's gaming session, they found out that the boy's nickname is the Watcher. Watcher. Dean finds this quite surprising, but Theodora says Dakota could be the one they've been looking for. Later that night, Nora apologizes for arguing with Dean earlier that day. She also says she'll agree to sell the house since it's sure that Dean will soon make partner at his company. Even though he knows that it's no longer happening, Dean doesn't tell his wife anything. However, he informs her that he thinks Dakota and Ellie are dating. Nora looks confused by this, but since Dean needs proof, he tells her that they need to check Ellie's phone. Nora doesn't like this idea, but since Dakota could be dangerous, she agrees to help Dean, just as she then goes to call Ellie for dinner.
Dinner's ready.
Nora tells her to leave her phone in her room because Dean wants no phones at the dining table. Following this, Ellie drops her phone and joins her family for dinner. Suddenly, Dean pretends to be in need of using the restroom, so he leaves the table and sneaks into Ellie's room. After confirming his suspicion, Dean immediately confronts Ellie about the lies she told him. However, she sounds pissed at her dad for checking her phone. She also says she hates Dean before leaving for her room. The next morning, Dakota arrives at the house for another routine check, but this time Dean confronts him for dating his young daughter. As Ellie sees this, she immediately calls the police to report that her dad is harassing someone outside the house. While Dean continues to shout at Dakota, the cops arrive and tell him to back off. Dean then tells the cops about Dakota's relationship with his daughter, but they mention that there's nothing illegal about it. Dean also mentions Dakota's nickname, but the cop says he can't just arrest the boy based on unverifiable proof. Dakota starts to feel embarrassed by this, so he tells one of the cops that he'll be willing to cooperate if they need to ask him questions. After a while, Chamberlain interviews Dakota and his parents about his nickname, but his mom says she was the one who gave him the name because of the nature of his work. As he also clears himself of any wrongdoing, Chamberlain goes to meet Dean and Nora to inform them that Dakota isn't the Watcher. Dean still sounds annoyed and questions Chamberlain's qualifications, but the police chief says he will get Dakota's DNA sample analyzed so that he'll cross-check it with the results of the sample on the Watcher's letters, which is expected to arrive in a few days. The next day, Ellie steals Carter's iPad and records a video informing the public that her dad has currently grounded her for dating a black boy. When Nora gets to the country club, everyone is already talking about it, but Karen realizes that her friend doesn't know what her daughter did yet. While Dean is also busy at work, his secretary shows him the video, and he immediately heads home. When he gets there with Nora, he sounds angry and smashes Ellie's phone for recording such a message that will definitely ruin his life.
Fucking...
Ellie still shouts at her dad and insults him for breaking her phone. Before his anger worsens though, Nora calms him and tells Ellie to go to her room. Dean then sits down and cries because he doesn't know how he'll redeem his image after his daughter's public lie about him. The next day, Nora gets her membership at the country club suspended, but Karen still manages to get her into the cafeteria. There, Karen tells Nora that things are really looking bad for her family. She also suggests that the only thing Nora can do now is to divorce Dean and sell the house. She mentions that she has already drawn up a contract which Nora just needs to show to Dean to make it official.
You get to start over.
Nora refuses to sign the document, and she also defends Dean. As she adds that she'll need to speak to Dean before she signs any document, Karen tells her to stop seeking permission from her husband before doing anything. She also tells Nora to be a role model for her daughter. Elsewhere, Dean is called to his boss' office after arriving at work. When he gets to the office, his boss shows him an envelope he got with a thumb drive inside. He then shows Dean a video of a girl entering his room while he's asleep. Dean immediately denies knowing the girl, but his boss doesn't believe him. As Dean tries to defend himself, he realizes that the girl in the video is wearing the same dress Pat was killed in. As he says that he thinks the girl is a dead person, his boss looks confused. After work that day, Dean heads out and sees Dakota waiting for him. He then accuses Dakota of framing him, but even though the boy confirms that he sent the video,
You're done.
he looks surprised as Dean says he doesn't know the girl. Despite this, Dakota says he only planted the camera in his room because he thought Dean was the Watcher. Dean is shocked to hear this, but Dakota says he only suspected him because he could have written the letters as a way to get his family to leave the house and solve his money problems. As Dakota repeats that he didn't hire the girl in the video, Dean starts to wonder how she even got in. A while later, Dean arrives home and realizes that Nora also got the same thumb drive.
I know what you did.
She immediately accuses him of having an affair, but he denies it and begs her to trust him. However, Nora tells him to leave the house, so Dean moves to the motel. While he's inside his room, he suddenly watches a commercial in which Andrew is one of the actors. This shocks Dean, and he starts to wonder if Andrew was paid to lie to him. Later that night, Dean leaves the motel and sits in his car to watch his house so that no one will break in. While he's there, Pearl stares at him from her house, but he doesn't seem to care. Shortly after, though, a cab arrives in the neighborhood, and Dean looks stunned to see Mitch and Maureen leaving the car and heading toward their apartment. The next day, Nora checks the family's phone records and discovers that the random call she got the other day at the motel came from the house. She immediately calls Theodora to meet up at a restaurant so they can talk about what she just found. During their conversation, Nora says she's starting to think that Dean is the Watcher, so Theodora suggests getting some of his writing samples so they can be analyzed. Elsewhere, Karen visits Mitch and Maureen to ask about the possibility of selling their house to her. They both reject her offer, but she says they need to sell quickly because their house is now a stigmatized property due to the random murders that happened there. She then says that she and Darren always work together to set up a company to buy properties in the area before flipping them. Mitch and Maureen still say they're not interested.
You don't know that.
But Karen warns them that she always gets what she wants. After she leaves, she then stares at Nora's house because it's her main target. The next day, Theodora meets with Nora to inform her that Dean's handwriting matches one of the letters. This leaves her shocked, but Theodora mentions that it makes sense for Dean to actually be the Watcher because he had to dig really deep to pay for the house. Nora asks what this means, so Theodora mentions that after speaking to Steve, she learned that Dean actually put all their investments on the line to buy the house. She adds that he even took a big loan from shady people. Nora says it's hard to believe because she didn't force Dean to buy the house, but Theodora says he likely bought it to please her and eventually realized that he couldn't keep up with it. As Nora mentions that Dean will probably be able to pay the money when he makes partner, Theodora tells her that, according to Steve, her husband has already lost the position to someone else. This leaves Nora speechless.
That wasn't a refi, Nora.
And as she wonders what to do, Theodora says they've finally caught the Watcher. Elsewhere, Dean finds Andrew's house and confronts him on the road for not mentioning that he's an actor. Andrew looks scared and says Dean never asked. As Dean also accuses him of lying about everything he said, Andrew says he never lied and that he stands by his previous statements. The next day, Nora goes to the museum where her artworks are being displayed. Surprisingly, she sees that nearly all of them have been sold, and this makes her happy. She even feels much better when the museum owner comes over and says she'd like to see Nora bring in more of her works for a show happening in a few weeks' time. After Nora arrives home, she gets a call from Dean, but she ignores it. As she then looks around, she notices that there's someone sneaking around the property.
Is that you?
She immediately starts looking around and finds Pearl, who pretends to just be walking by. Just then, Pearl invites Nora to her house for a luncheon with Maureen. Nora sounds uninterested because they still don't know what really happened in Maureen's house the other day, but Pearl convinces her to still come over. The next day, Pearl joins Maureen and Pearl for the luncheon. After Pearl brings up a random topic about the house, Maureen eventually decides to tell them what happened. She then mentions that Christopher was responsible for everything that happened. She adds that the last time she and Mitch spoke to him, they informed him about their trip to Florida. After they left, he then went into a nursing home and found people looking like his parents so he could kill them and collect the insurance money. Nora is shocked to hear this, but before she says anything, Maureen adds that since she heard what her son did, she now believes that he's the one who might have been writing the letters. However, Pearl says she actually thought it was Jasper because he liked the house a lot while growing up. She adds that some years ago, she received a letter praising their house and believed Jasper wrote it. She says it was titled Ode to a House and that it didn't contain any threatening words. Just then, Nora hears a strange sound in the house. Since Pearl mentioned that Jasper isn't around, Nora asks if there's someone else inside, but the homeowner brushes off the subject. When the sound persists, Nora gets curious and asks about it again, but Pearl stays silent. Before Nora says something, Maureen then jokes about how it could be Pearl's boyfriend. This sounds creepy to Nora, so she immediately leaves the house while the two old ladies stand at the door to watch her. When she then enters the house, Ellie apologizes to her mom for what she did and how she also got her dad in trouble. Nora then mentions the letter Pearl received and how it was named Ode to a House. As she says she doesn't even know what to believe anymore, Ellie asks if she thinks Dean is the Watcher, but she says she doesn't. Elsewhere, Dean sees Dakota after leaving work, and the boy begs to speak to him for a few minutes. When they finally sit in a nearby restaurant, Dakota shows footage from the house which confirms that the girl who appeared in the video didn't enter the house through any of the doors.
Dude, I don't know how she got inside your house.
He adds that even though he had doubts earlier, he now trusts Dean. Following this, they both head to the house to see Nora. When she sees them, she looks surprised, but after they enter the house, they tell her why they came. Nora also looks at the footage and realizes that the girl was not seen entering the house. As she asks if the girl is a ghost, Dakota mentions that the only other explanation is to believe that the girl came in through an entrance they don't know about. Nora still doesn't know what to think, so she requests to speak to Dean alone. When Dakota leaves, Nora asks Dean if he's the Watcher.
Are you writing those letters?
He then pauses for a while and says that he only wrote the last letter. Nora cannot believe this, but Dean says he only got scared about the decisions he made to be able to afford the house. He also begs her not to divorce him because of his mistake. Shortly after, Nora tells Dean to follow her to Chamberlain's office to confront him about the results of the DNA extracted from the Watcher's first two letters. When they get there, Chamberlain pretends to just be seeing the results, and as he shares it with them, he says it doesn't match anyone in the police database. However, he mentions that the result confirmed that the person is a woman. When they get home, Dean joins his family for dinner, and Ellie also says sorry for what she did. A while later, Dean and Nora continue working on the case to determine who could be the Watcher. Despite the DNA results, they both believe the person could still be a man who just has a woman around him. Dean also believes it's John Graff, but Nora says it doesn't make sense for it to be him. As they keep looking at the board of possible suspects, Nora says they need to understand the person's motive. Since the Watcher is always talking about the house and how much he loves it, they both believe that it has to be someone who wants the house.
What's motivating someone to write those letters?
The next day, Karen calls Nora and mentions that she already has an offer for the family to sell the house. However, the price seems too low, so Nora asks about it. Karen then mentions that it's likely because of the letters. She adds that even though she doesn't know the identity of the buyer, it might just be a company who wants to tear it down. Nora immediately mentions that she doesn't think anyone would want to tear down a house like that, but Karen tells her to forget about it and think about the sale already.
Oh, come on. What are you talking about?
Shortly after, Nora then tells Dean that she's going to the country club to see Karen. When she gets there, she sees Karen having lunch with Chamberlain. Since he's likely the mystery man she's now dating, Nora calls Dean to meet her at the country club. When he arrives, they both then confront Karen and Chamberlain for being responsible for trying to kick them out of the house. Chamberlain looks embarrassed because there are people watching what's happening, but Nora and Dean don't stop with their accusations.
Hi.
The couple also add that they now understand why Chamberlain always tried to delay the process of finding the Watcher. Chamberlain continues to deny having anything to do with it. Dean says he'll be pressing charges and suing them. As they leave, though, Karen sounds angry and says she'll make sure everyone knows what's happening in their house so that it would be harder for them to sell. When the couple reach home, Nora suggests selling the house and returning to their old home in New York after paying Dean's debts. Dean agrees with this.
Your show sold out?
But before he can say much, Ellie shows up and tells her parents that she just found a group on social media named Ode to a House. She then mentions that it's like a class project which was under the supervision of a teacher named Roger. As she looks at his picture, Nora remembers seeing Roger at the open house, so she believes he was likely interested in the house too. While they're talking about it, one of the construction workers comes over to inform them that there's something they need to see. After following him, the man shows them that his workers just found a strange tunnel inside the house. Without hesitation,
Oh my God.
Dean enters the tunnel and Nora follows him. As they keep walking inside, they suddenly see someone running away, and this leaves them terrified because it turns out that someone has actually been sneaking into their house since they moved in. Despite Nora's warning, Dean runs down the tunnel to see whoever it is.
Who are you?
But unfortunately, the person disappears before he can get closer. As he and Nora then look around, they see that whoever was under the tunnel has been living down there for a while. Elsewhere, John appears through the tunnel, and as he hits a doorbell, the door opens and Pearl appears in front of him. Before he then enters her house, he mentions that Dean and Nora almost caught him. The next morning, Dean and Nora report what happened to Chamberlain, but he refuses to help them because of how they embarrassed him at the country club the other day. Surprisingly, he also mentions that he'll get his revenge by exposing Dean for writing one of the Watcher's letters. The couple quickly deny this.
What?
Excuse me?
I think you heard me.
But Chamberlain says he could make Dean go to jail for 10 years. Since it's clear that he won't help them, Dean and Nora leave the police department and immediately head home. When they get there, Theodora shows up, saying she has new information for them, but the couple don't seem interested because they believe she told Chamberlain about the letter Dean wrote. However, Theodora says she has no reason to tell Chamberlain and that the handwriting expert likely told him what happened. She adds that she doesn't have long to live, so they shouldn't make her regret working for them. Just then, Dean and Nora sit down to listen to Theodora, who calls Roger the new suspect. She mentions that after visiting the man's ex-wife Trish, she learned that Roger actually had an obsession for most of the houses in the area, including Dean's house. His love for the houses made him want to become an architect, but since he couldn't afford going to school, he had to settle for being an English teacher in the town school. While Roger was still with Trish, he had the opportunity to buy one of the houses he liked, but since he couldn't afford it, He lost the bidding and was left devastated by this. Years later, he then started Ode to a House with his students. During the class, he told students to send anonymous letters to any house in the area they liked. Even though he wasn't a student, Roger sent letters to the house he once couldn't afford. The present owner, Carol, was initially happy with all the letters she got until they eventually started sounding dark. After receiving a letter in which he sounded angry about never getting a letter back from the house, the next one that Carol received came with the Watcher's name on it. Even though she wasn't the one who got the letters, Trish says that Carol came to her with them to confirm if they were sent by Roger. Since Carol appears to be the first person to receive a letter directly from the Watcher, Theodora suggests going to see her, so Dean and Nora agree. When they get to the house, Carol welcomes them in.
So, how did you track me down?
She also confirms everything Trish said, while adding that Roger was always talking about houses in a weird way from when he was young. Even though Carol says she knows Roger is the Watcher, Theodora mentions that they might still not be able to say for sure. After they leave Carol's house, Dean and Nora tell Theodora that they're going to confront him, but the detective tells them not to do so because they can't confirm if he's really the Watcher. Despite this, Dean and Nora watch Roger leave his house with his new wife, Miko. They then follow the couple to a supermarket, where they finally confront Roger for sending threatening letters to scare them away from the house. Roger says he doesn't know what they're talking about, but they don't believe him. He then tells them that if they really think he did something, they should report it to the police. The next morning, Dean sees Roger standing outside the house and immediately goes out with Nora to confront him. Roger then says that since they accused him of being the Watcher, he'll now watch their house every day for as long as he wants. He adds that he's now their enemy, and there's nothing they can do to keep him from watching their house. Dean is angry about this, but Nora drags him inside so he won't fight the man. The following day, while Pearl is having a Preservation Society meeting with John and Jasper, Dean knocks on the door. John immediately hides, and as Pearl opens the door, Dean says he'd like to come in to check if there's a tunnel leading to his house. Pearl refuses to let him in, and she says he's losing his mind. Suddenly, John sneezes, so Dean asks who is inside, but she immediately locks the door and yells at him through the window. Later that night, while Dean is sleeping, he has a nightmare in which he sees Roger killing Carter. He wakes up looking terrified, but Nora quickly calms him. In the morning, Dean still keeps thinking about the nightmare, and as Nora sees that he's bothered, she says they need to sell the house and leave New Jersey permanently. A while later, as Dean is heading to work, he sees Roger talking to Maureen. Since he still thinks Roger is the Watcher, Dean believes the man got into the tunnel through Maureen's house. He also accuses them of being part of a blood cult, like Andrew said, but they don't seem to get what he's talking about. He then tells them that he and his wife are already listing the house for sale, and they can buy it if they want. Later that night, Dean and Nora announce their decision to Ellie and Carter, but the kids don't seem happy about it. The next day, though, the couple finally accepts a huge offer for the house. While they're packing, they thank Theodora for all her help, but they agree to forget about the entire case because they'll now be heading to New York to start their lives again. Shortly after, Nora receives a call informing her that the individuals who agreed to buy the house have taken back their offer. It then turns out that there's now a story on the internet about the things that happened at the house. Nora suspects that Karen had something to do with it, so she immediately goes to confront her old friend.
You did this!
However, Karen doesn't deny it, and she says that Nora doesn't deserve to make a profit from the house. She also adds that she'll make sure they make next to nothing on the sale. The next day, Dean and his family leave New Jersey and return to New York. Shortly after, Nora's show turns out to be a success again, and she looks really happy.
Really? Oh my god.
When she gets home, she calls her new realtor to ask if he has gotten any new offers for the house, but he says he hasn't. As she goes into the room to complain to Dean, Nora sees that he has started working on the Watcher case again. Nora tells him that he needs to stop, but he says he won't stop until he finds whoever ruined their chance at a perfect life. He adds that he really wanted to make his family leave New York for a calmer place, and that he doesn't like being back. Nora still tells him to forget about it, but Dean doesn't seem ready to do that.
We're never going to know.
The next day, Theodora's daughter informs the couple that the private detective's condition is now worse. They immediately visit her at the hospital, and they offer to help her with whatever she wants. Theodora then tells Dean to help her get something from a nearby shop. After he leaves, Theodora asks Nora how things are going for them. She initially starts by saying that her artworks have now become popular. However, she then mentions that she's not really happy because Dean has not forgotten about the Watcher case. Following this, Theodora tells Nora that it's normal for Dean to keep obsessing over the case because it's human nature to always want to close a case like that. She also tells Nora to give him some time.
I can tell something's eating at you.
The next day, Nora reads an article in the newspaper about how their old neighbors in New Jersey received new threatening letters. Since it is also mentioned that the letters came from Manhattan, Nora asks if Dean sent it, and he confirms it, saying he won't just let them torture his family and get away with it.
Maybe I did.
However, Nora says he needs to call and apologize to them. That night, Theodora calls Dean and tells him to come to the hospital. When he gets there, she decides to confess that she's the Watcher. Dean is shocked by this, but Theodora says she did it because she wanted the house. She adds that she was the one who sold it to them after initially thinking she was broke. She then tells Dean about how she stalked him and also got the idea to send the letters from the Ode to a house group. She even talks about how she manipulated Andrew into talking about things that didn't happen. Dean then asks if Chamberlain knew her plan when he suggested her to him, but Theodora says she only convinced the police chief to give her the case. Dean doesn't know what to say, but Theodora mentions that she just doesn't want to die without telling him. Shortly after, Dean goes home to tell Nora everything Theodora said. She's also shocked by this, and she wonders why it took Theodora so long to tell them. A while later, Dean travels to New Jersey to apologize to Maureen for sending the new letters. He also says sorry to her for Mitch's recent death. Maureen forgives him and asks why he suddenly changed his mind. Dean says he now knows the truth and that he couldn't believe Maureen's old neighbor was the Watcher all along. Maureen is confused by this, but as Dean says Theodora used to live there before him and his family, she says it's a lie. She adds that there was never a Theodora living in the area. This shocks Dean, and on the day of Theodora's funeral, he and Nora ask the woman's daughter if her mom ever owned a house in New Jersey. Just then, the lady says that her mom only lied to Dean so he could be at peace with his decision to sell the house. The next day, Dean and Nora finally get an offer for the house, so they decide to sell it. It eventually turns out that Karen is the one who bought the house. On the day she moves in, Nora visits her and says she always knew Karen wanted the house. This gets Karen angry, and she complains about how Nora is responsible for how low she sold the house because she was too scared of letters that weren't even so bad. Nora then smiles and says that Karen needs to be careful because she has a feeling that things won't go as well as she expects.
So I'd be careful.
Elsewhere, Roger and Maureen become members of the Preservation Society. While all the members introduce themselves, Roger recognizes John, but the shady man says it's likely a mix-up. Shortly after, Maureen and Pearl visit Karen to welcome her. However, she rejects their baked gifts and sounds quite rude. Later that night, she then sees water leaking from her bathroom. After closing the tap, even though she's not the one who opened it, she calls Chamberlain to ask if he can send his men to guard her house, but he says he won't help her because of how badly their relationship ended.
We're not friends.
Following this, Karen suddenly hears her dog barking in the creepy basement. After bringing the dog back to the living room, she looks really scared, but eventually decides to go to bed. Before she starts sleeping, she hears the dumbwaiter making a sound. When she heads out to check it, she sees that there's a letter inside. As she reads it, she realizes that it's a letter from the Watcher, who has now selected her as his new target. Karen immediately runs down the stairs, but before she can head out, she sees a strange person standing behind her. This terrifies her, so she runs outside and abandons the house. Days later, Dean is already seeing a therapist, but he can't seem to stop talking about the house in New Jersey. He then mentions that it won't be easy for him to forget about it. As a new family moves into the house after Karen sold it for a really low price, the neighbors start to act weirdly toward them. Dean also goes to New Jersey and stands outside the house to admire it. The new owner, Bill, sees him and asks who he is. Dean then lies that his name is John and that he lives a few blocks away. Bill then asks if he'll be seeing him around.
See you around then?
And Dean says he definitely will. Shortly after, he then enters his car and watches the new owner taking out the letters in his mailbox. Just then, Nora calls Dean to ask about the interview he said he was going to. Dean says it went well, so Nora thanks him for all the effort he has been putting into forgetting the house in New Jersey and being happy in New York. Dean says it's fine and that he'll be home soon. As he then drives away, it turns out that Nora is also close to their old house, and she knows that he's lying to her.